Hello, tonight we're going to be working on the Unit 2 Part 2 assignments. And you can see I have the assignment document open on my screen here. In the background I also have my SQL Server Management Studio up and running. And I'm just going to start stepping through the steps that are indicated here and basically help you complete the assignment at this point. I know some of you have already worked on this. And last time we had started working on it, but I know I was getting questions, so I figured let's just go right back to the beginning and plow through it, and it'll make a lot more sense that way. Now, if you go back to our course shell, you will notice that in this particular unit, in this particular assignment, there's actually a couple of files attached here, and I apologize that this one's still named Unit 3 here because it used to be part of our Unit 3 database thing, but I like to put everything in one chapter together. There's a SQL file here that you want to download as well. So to download it, all you have to do is literally click on it, and then it'll drop down into your system tray here, and you do the same thing with the document file. Once you have that SQL file on your machine, go ahead and open it up. Now, I've opened it up actually in a separate program. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to be really careful here about how I create the database. And I want you to look at some of the commands inside here, because really what you need to do if you read the instructions, in fact, let's just do that. Maybe that's a better way to start here. It says, open the attached SQL file and copy and paste the code into a new query window. Another way to do it is to run the file, but for now it is easier for you to copy and paste the statements. Okay? Make sure to take all of the statements and click execute. Now you'll have a new database named AP, and that's the one we're going to use to do all the homework in this document. So everybody's clear with that, and I think those of you that were here last time that managed to do it, you should be okay. But what I do want to show you inside this document, and this is not atypical, is some of the commands here so that we have like a little bit of a better handle on what's going on, rather than just like taking the statements and then running them and not having any clue as to what we're doing, right? I don't think that serves any functional purpose. The first thing that we're going to do is you'll notice down on line 9, I mean, our goal is to create that database, right? So you can see I'm highlighting those lines right now because ultimately that's the goal. But prior to that happening, I have to be careful as to where I'm creating that database. So here's kind of the conundrum. The first statement inside of here says use master. Now what they mean by that is inside SQL Server and any database product, there's always what we call like a root level database that runs all of the databases. It might be a little bit confusing, but when we say use master, what we're saying is use the master database. We're talking about this one up here. So instead of, let's say, maybe using AdventureWorks and then creating a database underneath it, AdventureWorks, that's not what we want to do. We want to create another unique entity here, and so that's why we have a use master statement, so that it goes back to the root and then creates the database. It also has a little provision in here, and it says if database ID AP, which is the one we're about to create, is not null. In other words, if we already have it, right? Like you tried this before, maybe you messed it up or something, or this is your second go around with class. That happens to people, I understand. That would actually delete the pre-existing one, right? And that way we start with a clean slate and one that we know is okay. And then this will go through and create all the tables, and you can see all the commands in here, and then ultimately towards the bottom start inserting data into each one of those tables to populate them all. And it's not really necessary to look at all of it, but just to kind of get a handle on it. So let's go ahead and create a new query window here. And then I'm going to do exactly what's recommended in the document. And now I could open the file directly from SQL Server. So that's a question that I'll often get. And if you prefer to do that, that's quite all right. So you can just go open, and then you can find File, and then just come here and locate wherever it is. For me, it's going to be in my downloads folder. So here's the file. So why not just do it that way? The other way that you can do it is you can go to a text editor, and I think I demonstrated this last time. I went to Notepad++, I copy pasted everything in. You guys remember what happened to me? I got a bunch of junk characters in there. I don't know if you guys saw that or not. And the reason that happens at times, and in fact, it's almost like worthy of demonstrating. I'll just make another new query window, and I don't know if it'll happen this time, but I'm just going to do Control A, Control C. So I'm in Notepad++ right now. I'll come back over here and do a Control V. When it looks like it pasted okay. But sometimes what happens when you do this is you will get junk characters that pop up. And I do notice that I do have like a little red mark here somewhere. You know, it doesn't like that. Right, it says use that because it's not there. So the copy paste actually worked. But I have seen it, depending on what text editor you're using, and the encoding supported by the text editor, it can bring junk into your program. Where that's most apt to happen is if you have something that does rich text natively, like Microsoft Word or something of that sort. So there's no point in me having both of these open, so I'm just going to go ahead and close this second one. Here's the one that I just opened up. I'm going to go ahead and click execute on it. You guys should do the same. All right. And then if you start looking through here, it says how many rows it affected, and it didn't throw any error messages that I can see, so it seemed like everything worked okay. Now the question is, how come the database didn't pop up on the left? Yeah, and that's kind of a quirk with many of the database products that don't automatically refresh like a lot of our file systems do, or other programs might. So you actually have to manually come in here, hit that little refresh. Sometimes apparently you have to hit it more than once. And then if that doesn't seem to work, sometimes I go through the trouble of collapsing it down. And you can see how it's saying like not responding up in my toolbar, because I just clicked it a whole bunch of times. I probably shouldn't have done that. So one of the things you want to be here is patient, because there's a lot that just happened in the background, even though we don't appreciate it. It basically affected several hundred rows of code. Now you see how it flashed? Now it finally did what it was supposed to do. So when I re-expand this, it should, well, there, it's not there. So now the question is, did it actually work? Well, it did. So can you see the quirkiness of that? So don't get frustrated if it doesn't pop up. It's really easy to get frustrated with this. Just be understanding that we have a large piece of software in the background. It's doing very, very complicated tasks. It's not a document, and it's not like plain text computer code alone. It's all the mechanics of the database that are operating as well. So now I do have this database, and then we can see if the tables are there, right? So you see tables, and then you can like go in there and you can look at the columns, and if you want, you can do a simple, select star statement and just put everything up on the screen and see what's inside there if you so choose. All right, but now we've done that first step. So let's go back to the document. So step 2 is complete. Then it says create your database diagram of your new database and use all tables. It should look similar to the one below. Okay? And it says note, you will have to right click on database, properties, files, and change the owner of the files as is done in the relationship assignment, which of course you guys didn't have. So I'm not really too worried about the ownership of the database at this point. But let's go ahead and do the right click, and then where do we go? Properties, right? Isn't that what it said? Click properties. And then what is it that it wants us to do? What did it say? Okay. And who's the owner? Me. If you're not the owner of your database, it's going to be a little problematic. Okay? So this is why we do this step, is just to make sure that we are the owner. If you are not the owner, if it's not your machine, like if you're on a school machine, that can cause some issues. That's kind of one of the reasons why that's in the assignment. The other reason that we put that in there as well is sometimes we get students that are working on the VDI, and on the VDI, they're also not the owner. You know, it's like some, you know, generic super user account. So this looks all fine. Let's just go ahead and say, okay. Now, does anybody remember how to actually create the database diagram? Okay? You're guiding me, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
You know, the thing you can always do is you can look at, you know, it says properties, files, change the owner. But how did we do this? Remember, it was not that hard.
No.
This is a quiz from sort of for you guys. How is this where we even did it? Or could we go to database diagrams and maybe just make a new database diagram? It's, you know, sometimes the answer is so easy it's kind of painful that you don't see it in front of you. But you know, if this wasn't expanded, you would never see that, right? But that's the one way, and frankly, folks, I think that's the easiest way to do it.
So I think it allows you even to have the screenshot and stuff if it's not there. Do they go away?
It goes away if you don't save it. Yeah, it's a good chance maybe you didn't save it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose New Database Diagram. It says the database does not have one or more of the support objects required to use database diagramming. Do you wish to create them? Sure. What it's saying is you haven't done this before. Which table should we do? How about all of them? Okay, let's select all of them. And let's go ahead and choose Add. Now the engine in the background is doing this. It's looking at all your tables, all the columns, and all the relationships that have been predefined by whoever built the database. So if there's any sort of primary and foreign key relationship, if there's an inner join or an outer join or whatever the case may be, and then it'll put them all up on the screen. Now you can see from my scrolling that some of this is not too badly laid out already, right? I mean, at least this part, I can see all the connections. They're all on the same screen. I just got these two tables floating up here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab this table. I'm going to move it down here. Now I'm going to grab this table, and I'm just going to move it right here. I know these two are not connected. I can see that. But now when I scroll, I have everything on the same screen. And then this is where you can take your screenshot, because it's already been laid out pretty nice and clean. And now I'm just going to grab the snipping tool. Yes, I'm still using the basic one. You know, I had somebody was using this, you know, they say try Snip and Sketch, which is the Windows Store version of this. And I'm like, where'd you get that piece of software? I didn't realize it was new. But yeah, I haven't really tried it yet, so I stick with what works. All right, so here I am. Now I'm going to just drag around all my stuff here and grab a screenshot. And this isn't even so much about, you know, what's in the screenshot, but knowing how to do it. And understanding that once you have a database built and you have those connections made between the tables, that there's an automatic diagramming tool. When we move into our next unit, I'm going to ask you to conceptualize what some tables might look like and the connections between them. That's the next step. And that's what we call logical design in databases. That's the next functional step for you guys. But here's my diagram. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the copy button on the toolbar here. I don't see any functional reason, you know, to put it in there. But you can see this one is actually the diagram that was provided, and it says replace the diagram below with your own. So you should delete that one and then paste your own in there just to show me that you did it. Now I was pretty strategic and it fit in there pretty nicely, and I'm not looking for like artwork here, right? I'm just looking at, you know how to do that step and get an output. All right, so if we got that one, let's move on to the next one. Next thing it says is verify your tables have been populated correctly. Count the records in each of the following tables. Now this is what it should be. Now I don't know if you guys caught this or not, but one way to actually kind of double check this, we already kind of did it. Okay, so I'm kind of whispering it. But you know, notice how it says 8, 75, 118, 114, 5, and 122. See how, you know, it's not like any mistake that matches up with these. Because every time you do an insert, it'll tell you how many times or how many rows were affected by your query, right? But the question is, how do you write the code to do that? That's a little bit of a separate thing, right? So is there code from that for that? And if there is, what is that code? Well, I just happen to have it very handily off to the side here, which I'm going to pull off screen. So the first thing is to figure out how to put that in. So what command would I type to do that? Should I type a command? Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty simple statement. I'm trying to see if I can copy paste it from my PDF here, but it's not wanting to cooperate, so give me a second to download this. Sometimes like the browser PDF viewers I find a little cumbersome. So here I am opening up a proper PDF where I can like, you know, copy paste. All right, so here's one way to do it. So the basic command, and I'm just going to create a new query for this, by the way. The basic command is going to be this. So for all the tables that we have, now why is it underlining red? Well, remember, we're in a Microsoft product here, so we can hover and it'll say invalid object name. Yeah, well, we don't have a use statement in here to tell it to use AP. Right? Now you see how those all go away? Right, because it doesn't know what we're running a query on at this point. Okay, what's another way I could have handled that? Is there another way I could have? Could I have added a prefix here, perhaps? Could I do something like this? Would that work? Yeah, but you notice how it's not like exactly jiving with what I'm doing? There is a schema approach. Let's not like worry about that one yet. Let's use the AP and let's let the auto type complete the lines for us. Okay, and then let's go ahead and run this. And then it's going to output a table for you, or kind of like a series of outputs here. And then if you wanted, I would go ahead and I would screenshot that. And I don't need the whole screen. I just need, you know, the basics. And if my font was smaller, it would be even more efficient, right? Then I would just copy that. So I'm going to Control C right now. Back over to Word. And if you want to prove it to me, you could paste it in and just show me that you did it. That is a little bit on the obnoxious side, mind you. But are we showing the same results that they're seeing? And the answer is definitely yes. So we do verify that we have the same number of records. And you probably should actually look at the numbers. It's helpful. Okay. Now we're going to move on to another concept here. There is, actually one other way to do the same thing. And I think it's kind of worthy of showing this. So here, let me show you a different approach if you're curious. So here's kind of like a generic format where you can actually declare a table by name and then count the rows like this. It's a different set of commands if you're curious. Every once in a while we'll get a clever student that knows their databases and we'll do it this way. And this is maybe a little deeper. Those of you watching the video can screenshot that, but it's going away right now. Next statement says, write an inner join. Join the invoices table to the vendors table. Output the following fields. Make sure to use column aliases as shown below. Okay, so there's going to be some column alien. It says you don't have to show all the records, but just the first 15 should suffice. You can screenshot the top 15 as shown below, or you could add the command select top 15 from vendors. You could just do it that way. Up to you which way you want to do it. All right. So now let's kind of recall a little bit what an inner join is. How would you quantify an inner join if somebody was just, hi, what's an inner join? And then hopefully you're like leafing through your book really quick or you're Googling it really quick. Yeah, okay, so you're joining the tables to get data from both tables. Yeah. And what are we joining, how are we joining them is the secondary question. What's the joining criteria? Well, you have to have something that's common in the tables, correct? How are you going to join the information if there's no link between the two? Or can you? See where I'm going with this? Right? Can I just like randomly grab, can I just say, well, these two tables are joined now? You can. No, it doesn't make logical sense, and that's exactly where I'm going with that. Typically, if you're joining a table, it's because there's some things that are in common. So before we write any statement, let's go actually take a look at the database. And the ones that we need to join is the invoices table, right? Invoices table and the vendors table. Now, sometimes a diagram is really helpful. So you guys see where I'm going with this, right? So I see with my invoices table down here, I have invoice ID, vendor ID, invoice number, blah, 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 right? I went blah, blah, blah on purpose, by the way, because I already skipped over the parts that are important. Then I go to my vendors table, and then right away I notice vendor ID, and right away I got this bell in my head going ding, 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 right? Well, I have a vendor ID here and a vendor ID here. Hopefully those are the same thing, right? So the first thing I would do is something like this. So let me just start typing a new query. All right, let's do our use AP, so we make sure we attach to the right database. And then I'm going to type in my select statement. And I'm going to be a maverick here and type all lowercase. And you know what? They gave us a tip, right? We can use top 15 to get the top 15 results. And now when I write this query, I do have to do a little bit of thinking about this because I want to grab some information and then I want to output it with a different alias. So vendor ID and then invoice number as NO dot, right? And then vendor and then invoice total. Does that match up with what's in my diagram? well, let's see, I got vendor, and then I have vendor name. That's not quite the same as vendor, right? Which I see in the output that they want. So, and where am I getting that from? I'm looking right here. See? So in the table, it says vendor name. Here, it just says vendor. So that is an alias. See what they're asking? And then invoice number, well, I don't see an invoice. Well, I see invoice number like this. This is not very user-friendly. So once again, that's got to be an alias as well. So here's where I'm going with that. All right. This is how I'll start to build it. So I'm going to say, well, I want to pull in the vendor ID from the vendor table, right? And I also want to pull in stuff from the invoice table. So how do I functionally get that to work? All right, well, let me start by just doing this. If I just want to see what's in the vendors table, I could just do this, right? And you know what? Heck, let's run it and just make sure it's pulling back information. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. That works. All right. If I want to pull back information from the invoices table, just to see what it is. And I encourage you guys, when you're building queries, it's not a bad idea to get a tab or two. Like if you're joining tables, get a tab or two up where this stuff is just sitting there, and then you can kind of see it. And then when you run your subsequent queries, you can go, oh, is that right? Oh yeah, sure enough. You know, then you don't have to create it after the fact, just to compare. All right. But I'm going to take a slightly different approach here. So watch the way that I'm doing this, and this is kind of like a little hierarchy thing that I kind of learned I think is convenient. So I'm noticing that if I want to pull back the vendor ID from this table, you notice that, you know, vendor ID is called by name, but I do want to output it with an alias, and so I'm going to say, I think what they did was this in the document, right? Oops, and I'm going to put in a comma here. Now, why is this highlighting, and what's the deal with the V? Okay, and let me do this. Maybe this will be kind of interesting, because when you do a select statement, you can do something like this. So I'm going to say I'm going to pull it from vendors, and then I can put in a V after it. And what the V will do then is give me a symbolic name for the vendors table. But you won't see that happen until you put the from statement in. So that's why I added that in first. But I want to add more statements here. So I do want to get the vendor ID from the vendor table, which I've now kind of aliased as a V. And I want to rename it to an output column called vendor ID. That's not the only thing I want to do that with. In fact, I wanted to do that with the invoice table. So once again, I'm going to start aliasing here. And I want to pull an invoice number and alias it as invoice, think like this. Did they have a period in there too? How could I fix this? I mean, I could, right, let's just do hypotheticals here. I could, instead, I could actually call the table itself. And what's the table called? Right? And I could, and why is it not finding that one either? Yeah, I don't, that's exactly correct. I don't have it listed down there. And in fact, the reason it's not happening is because I don't have the inner join set up yet. So even though it seems kind of backwards, and I'm sorry I'm like mistyping here, I'm actually going to do, and I'm going to stick with lowercase, believe it or not. I'm actually going to do the inner join statement first because I know I'm doing one anyhow. And I'm going to declare it as I so that I can just come in here and use the prefix of I to indicate the table, which is, for me, significantly more efficient. Okay. Our statement is not quite done yet. We have more stuff we want to do. So we're going to grab the vendor ID and list it as vendor ID, right? We want the invoice number listed as invoice no, right? And then what comes next? Vendor, does that have an alias too? That has an alias too. So that one's going to be v dot vendor name, and I'm just going to pull it from the list. It's easier than mistyping it. And we'll alias that as vendor. And then we want invoice total, and I'm just going to show you, right? Invoice total. That's not the way it appears in the table, wherever the table, there's no space in it. So I'm going to go I dot invoice total, and then give it an alias. So it's not uncommon if you're doing output, especially if other people are looking at it, to go through and alias things just so the column headings are nice. I mean, why not, right? So we're going to select the top 15. From vendors, we're going to interjoin with invoices. And what are we joining on? We kind of already determined that, right? What are we joining on? Well, here's where the diagram comes in handy, folks. Vendor ID and vendor ID. The only difference is that they're from two different tables. So I'm going to go v dot vendor ID. Oops, hit the wrong key there. Vendor ID equals I dot vendor ID. Oops. Once again, let the auto type do the work for you. Now, I'm going to tell you what would have been smarter would have been this, that I actually wrote these statements first, right? And then the aliases would all pop into place. Sometimes you have to think about it carefully a little bit, but that's a really simple little way to join them. Let's see if we're okay with this, and let's go ahead and run and execute. All right, so it's telling me I got a mistake. So let's see if we can figure out what that is. It says, blah, 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 incorrect syntax near the keyword from. All right, peoples, help me. What am I missing? Oh, you mean you put the keyword in? Yeah, that shouldn't change it, but you know what? I'm willing to try anything to make it work, right? I mean, and this is like one of the syntax differences between old and new. Let's see if that executes. What if should I remove these now? Let's try it again. I'm really curious because here's one of those things where you're working between different versions of the SQL language, and how it worked.
I think you had something selected.
Yeah, you know what, Vaughn? You're probably right. I probably had something selected somewhere that maybe it was off the screen or something. But either one of those is okay. So either approach you used. So if you want to drop this in, once again, you could just copy the code if you want. Drop the code in itself. I guess to me it seems like the screenshot would be more efficient and faster, And just grab what you need, and really, I guess you should probably show me the output too, right? So you could grab both things at the same time and then show them both to me. So let's just assume you did that. Okay? Did everybody get it to work, more importantly? All right. Let's move on to the next one. So number 6 says, modify the above query to also interjoin the terms and invoices table to display one additional field, terms due days. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding this clearly first. So it said modify the query, not destroy it. Are you guys catching that part of it? And it has basically the same 4 output columns. So I know right now that I'm not touching anything I have. I'm just going to add to it. But I want to pull in terms due days. So we want to interjoin the terms and invoices table. Let's go look at the diagram again. For me, that's always helpful. So here's terms. And how do I know what this connects to? Is there something that connects back to the vendors table? No. In fact, they're telling us to join terms and invoices. They're expressly stating it. And then I do see that there's a terms ID and a terms ID. So I think this is going to be pretty simple, folks. So let's just modify what we already have, and I'm just going to add to it, and I'm just going to say another inner join from the terms table, which I'm going to designate as T, and we're going to join on terms ID equals. Now, why did I choose I here instead of T? I just went ahead and declared that as a T. Well, the answer to that is because I'm joining it back to the invoice table, which is already designated as I. Doesn't matter which direction I do it, which goes first. Interesting question, right? Yeah, and I'm seeing that I got a typo here. No wonder it didn't pick up the alias right away. There we go. So that's all we have to do to make this happen. Now, let me ask you, that'll output this column? If I run it, will it give me that column? I don't think so either. But we do have a join. So how then do I output that column? Okay, can I just add it here? I mean, can I add the statement up here? Okay, so then what should I put here to make that happen? The terms due days is part of the terms table, right? Okay, so I should use the T because that's what I designated, and then I can choose term due days. I could use the as keyword if I want, or and is this okay? The answer is yes. And let me get the this out of the way here so you can see the whole thing. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run it so we can see the output, and it should just add that column. All right, let's call that one complete, and let's move on to number 7. All right, this next one, it's the problem with dual screening. I've been scrolling on one screen but not the other. All right, so we have our command here for that, right? The one that we just did, you just drop that in there. For number 7, it says, write an inner join statement. Join the GL accounts table to the vendors table. Output the following fields. Make sure to use column aliases as shown below. So we're going to output account number, vendor name, contact person, and account description. But once again, we want to be really careful here to make sure that we're understanding what they're asking us to do. And it's helpful when I was learning this stuff to always look at these diagrams and just get that visual in my head of like what I'm actually trying to join. It just helps. And so once again, we're going to join the GL accounts. So this one, so all that's in there is account number and description. And then we're going to join that with the vendors table. So when I think here, account number, okay, so that's your primary key, and then you got an account description. That is probably, I mean, I don't know exactly what they're putting in there, but I can see from the output that they're expecting that they're looking at, you know, well, I guess the kind of account it is, postage, direct mail, book costs, whatever, and then each one of those has an account number. What to you makes sense from the vendors table to tie that together? Obviously they want the vendor name and the contact person, right? And you notice how the contact person's got the first name and the last name split into 2 fields. And then in the output here, they're expecting those both in the same column. So it's a combination of activities. But how are we attaching the account number to the vendor? What's the field here that's making that connection? Do we assume it's default account number? Is that a good guess? Yes, that's a good guess. All right, I'm going to start this one out kind of the way that I did the last one. So I am going to start a new query. I'm going to put my use statement in. Let's just, make sure we're using the right database. And then I am going to do a select. And do we need to do top 15? Yeah, I'm going to anyhow. Right? Who needs more than that? And then I'm going to go to the next line and start typing the rest. I know that I'm going to have some gobbledygook here, but I know from last time that it was helpful that I actually had my from statement. And one of the tables I know I'm going to pull from is vendors. And I'm going to give that its alias. And then I know I'm going to inner join from the GL accounts table, which I'm going to abbreviate GL, makes sense. And what am I joining on? I'm going to join on the account number. And then I'm going to go back to the default account number on the vendors table, if I remember the right thing. Now, the reason I'm doing that preemptively is so when I start typing all my prefixes up here, it'll all clean up. And now I'm going to start doing the actual column. So I happen to be looking on my screen, my second screen actually. I'm seeing all these. So I'm trying to put these together piece by piece. So we'll do it one step at a time. So first we're going to start with default account number. Oops. And you know what? This time we'll use the as keyword just to demonstrate it. And they want it output as account number like this. Put in a comma for the next statement. Vendor name, that's going to be a fairly easy one. That's just going to come right from the vendor table. And that'll be output as vendor space name. And now we got that first name, last name combo thing. Because it's convenient for whoever is going to be looking at this in the aftermath to recognize the person as a complete entity. And if I remember right, they have the person's first name first, and then what does the plus sign do for me? It concatenates, right? Your programming skills become useful. And then we're going to pull in the last name, and then we're going to output it as contact person. Like so. We also have to get the account description in there, and here's where we get that from the other table that's joined. So we're going to just say GL dot account description, and we're just pulling that in as is. So whatever information is sitting in there, we're just pulling it in. Do I want to adjust this so it says as account description? And I would say yes if you want a space in there. If you don't want the space, you could leave it alone, right? Because if you look at the diagram, there's no space in there. And so part of what we're doing is we're also formatting the output. If you go ahead and execute that, you should get this up on your screen. So go ahead and take a moment and make sure you have it just like that, and make sure that it works.
Okay, next question. Why don't we need a semicolon at the end of all this stuff?
Well, Jill, that's an excellent question.
Okay.
You know what? You kind of do.
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of do. The functional answer to that is this. This is one of these quirks, right?
Okay.
If you think of like a lot of other programming languages do this too. If there's only one statement, you don't need a semicolon.
Okay.
So what's the better practice? To always put it in. Yeah, that's really, you know, I'll run the query again just to prove to you that it does work with the semicolon too. Yeah, and that's true. Like if you think of like in Java programming, right? If you have anything that's between a set of curly brackets and it's only one statement, you don't have to put a semicolon at the end of the statement. But the better practice is to always put a semicolon in. So I'm sorry I haven't been, but thank you for asking. It also shows you that it's all one statement. This is not a series of separate statements. It's one statement. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And hopefully everybody got that to work. So that was number 7. And now we're moving on to number 8. Number 8 says, modify the above query to also interjoin the vendors table to the invoices table. Modify the select clause to output the following columns. Use the following command to convert the dates. So giving you a little bit of a help with that. So since we're going to modify what we already have, we can just switch right back over to here. And let's think about this really quick. With the last time we did this, we also interjoined another table, and all we simply did is this, right? Which table did it want us to interjoin? The invoices table, right? So I'm going to call the table by name. I'm going to give it an alias of I. And what are we joining on? Well, we've done this before, right? the thing that they have in common, if you remember, is the vendor ID. Now why it's not auto-typing for me? Oh, you know why it's not auto-typing for me? Because I put a semicolon in, right? You got to get rid of that semicolon. Okay, now it will auto-type for me. And we're going to be joining that to the vendor ID in the vendor table. And see, I always like having that IntelliSense pop in for me so I don't type the wrong names in. For me, that's a big help. All right, so now we've got those joined together. So now we're pulling the invoices table into the mix. We're linking up through the vendor ID. And now we have to also have it output a couple of additional columns, if I remember right. So let's look at the assignment. So aside from the 4 that we started with, we want the invoice date and the invoice due date. And then we have to figure out where those are coming from. I think it's a pretty safe guess to think they're coming from the invoice table, right, without even looking. But if you're not sure, you know, and sometimes, frankly, you're not going to be sure. So you got to look. And, you know, you're probably safer off looking. But the invoice date is here, and then the invoice due date is here, and then we're already linking to this through the vendor ID. So we have a connection from vendor ID to vendor ID, and then we can connect those, the invoice date and the invoice due date. So both of those happen to be dates, and they gave us that little formula in there that, you know what, let's may as well just copy it. So on my other screen here, I'm copying that in. I know I'm going to add some to the select statement, so I'm just going to drop in. First thing, I'm going to convert this to varchar, which, you know, we haven't really talked a lot about data types here yet, but basically we're converting this to characters, which shows you that the date output is not in the form of characters. It actually has its own data type inside of the database, which is date time. So this is going to come from the invoice table, and we're going to pull the invoice date, and then I'm going to throw in a comma here and the number 107. Does anybody know why I'm doing that? What's the 107 all about? Just pick that at random. I'll tell you what, let's leave it in there and see if you guys can figure it out as we go. I'm going to output this as, and you know what? This really, we need to look at it, in my mind, it's easier to read this way. Putting it all in one line. I didn't mean to separate it like that. And we're going to output this as invoice date on the screen. And you see, just by missing the first double quotes, kind of messed it all up. Yeah, that 107 has a special meaning here.
Sorry, it's the format of the...
Yeah, it's to format the output. That is correct, Vaughn. And so you can look these up if you want. They are in the book. There's just different formats for outputting a date. It's not really that big a deal. It's just a matter of how you want to look at the date. With this, it will do a 3-letter month, the date with a comma, and then the year is a full 4-digit year. Right? Then we're going to put in that same convert statement again. And this time I'm going to pull the invoice due date from the list, give it the same formatting, and we're going to output that as invoice due date with spaces in it to get it there. So the whole of the query, I can get my mouse here to cooperate, is this. There is a use statement up at the top. Let's go ahead and execute it and see if it actually does what we think it's going to do. And it does. And once again, we're only selecting the top 15. What if I wanted to show all of them? All the records. What would I change? Yeah. And I would replace it with what? Maybe an asterisk? Would I do that? No. Just this, right? Right. So that's just to show you that if you want to run it and you want to see all of the output, which, you know, like your boss would probably want to see all of it. Okay, is everybody good with this one? Okay. Let's move on to the next one. This is number 9. So number 9 says, write an inner join statement. Join the vendors table to the contact updates table. Output the following fields. Make sure to use column aliases as shown below. So we want vendor name, first name, and last name. All right, so once again, the tables are vendors and contact updates. Go into the diagram. Okay, here's vendors, and here's contact updates. Now you notice that these two tables are not connected. They don't have like this symbol here that shows that there's a connection. Do you notice as I hover over these lines that a little pop-up comes up? So when I hover over the line between GL accounts and vendors, it says relationship, foreign key, vendors, GL accounts between GL accounts and vendors. Okay, so whatever that means, right, that means there's actually a designation inside the table that's forming that connection. That does not mean, because if we don't have that established, that I can't take a table that has a similar field and connect them. I still can do that. And I just want to explain that, so just in case you're thinking for some reason that you can't. Let's go ahead and create a new query. Let's use AP. And let's get our select statement in there. And we're also going to do a from. And we know we're going to do an inner join, right, because we're told to. And we know we're going to have an on that follows. So I'm just like kind of typing it up, just getting ready. And okay, so from where am I doing this? Does it matter which table I choose? Well, I'm going to, it kind of doesn't, honestly, but I'm going to choose contact updates, and I'm going to call that C. I'm going to join that to vendors and call that V. And what are we joining on? Well, there's only one field that was in common, if you remember. So I'm going to join from C vendor ID to be equal to V vendor ID. And now I'm going to type my select statement. I'm going to indent it. And what do we need to show? Well, V for vendor name, I'm looking at the output that we're supposed to get. So I'm going to pull in vendor name. And are you noticing here, okay, I'm trying to get the document on the screen. There's no spaces here. You guys catching that? I don't think that's a space, do you? I don't think so. I'm going to call it not a space, which is kind of like a gift, really, because now as I type my query, all I really have to do is pull in my vendor name from the vendor table, and then the first name from one table, and the last name from the other. And yes, I could have, you know, if I wanted to make it look nice, I could have put an as in there and added a string, sure, why not? But that's not what I was seeing, so why? You know, I mean, we're supposed to follow directions, right? Now, if you put an as statement in there, I don't care. That's fine. Let's go ahead and execute. And then you should get output that looks like this. And you can see top 15 for this one would be completely irrelevant, but it could give you that output if you wanted it. Okay, that was number 9, and I think we have 1 left, or we have 2 left. We have 2 left. Right? Or that was number 10. That was number 9, right? Okay, if you go to number 10, I want you to look at, now we're going to take a little bit of a conceptual leap here. We're going to write a left outer join statement, and we're going to join. Now, if you look at the number 9, I mean, we're joining the same tables. We're kind of doing the same output. You guys catching this? But the direction of the join is different. This is a left outer join. And what that means functionally for us is this, that the query that we already have written, this one here, we're going to switch a couple things around. What we're going to do is we're going to take this snippet and put it here, and that snippet and put it there. Now, in terms of, you know, we're doing what we call a left outer join at this part. We also have to change our syntax here to say left join. And the way that I like to think about it is the one table, the left join would be the vendor's table is driving the other one as opposed to the other way around. That's kind of how I think of it. So when I execute this, you will get null output. And no, I don't have top 15 selected, but you should see output now that looks like what's in your document here. So once again, the solution to number 10 is what you see here. And you can see the change in the terminology, and then we also changed the positions of these 2 table designations. Moving on to the last exercise, I believe, right? It's kind of like a thank goodness. Or no, not quite the last exercise. Okay, modify the above statement to only show vendors who do not have any contact updates in the contacts table. All right, well that poses a little bit of a difference, right? Because now we're going to qualify it, and we only want to see the ones that don't have contacts. So we know we're going to add a where statement to this. The question is, where does the where statement go? Well, that part's easy. That'll just go on the bottom. But what is the criteria of which we're searching? Is null is the correct search criteria. But we're only going to show the vendors who do not have any contact updates in the contacts updates table. And so we have to actually pull it from that table, the vendor ID, where it is null is the keyword there. And then we can put in our semicolon. So if you run that one, now your output should all be null. Now that could be useful And we could say is not null. We could try that too, right? All right, kind of keeping an eye on the clock here, so we're going to move on to the next exercise, which is close to our last exercise. All right. What if, and I guess we haven't tried anything like this yet, what if you want to add somebody to the contacts update table? Now, this is a command that you're going to find pretty often. So like as web programmers, which most of us are in this class at least, we often will have to write code where we're going to be dropping stuff into a database. So this is a command that's really, really useful. And the command is actually very simple. And so I'm just going to use this, this query that I already have going. And the command's going to be insert into, you choose your table, and I'm going to choose contact updates, and then I'm going to throw values in. And you can do it all in one line if you want, but since I'm kind of thinking towards screenshots, I might do something like this. And then how do I want to insert the names? Well, you know, it depends on how the table is structured. To me, it seems like last name comes first, so that's the way I'm going to list it, right? So I'm going to change these values into, and let's just do, I'm going to use single quotes here. Say Smith, comma, John. If I go ahead and execute this, and then how do I know it worked? I can do a select statement, right? And just output it all. And then I can see that Smith John did add to the list. So what you could have done, you know, if you want to be clever here, is you could have wrote two statements, right? One to insert the name. Oops. And then one to show you the results, so it made sure it worked. And now I ran it again, so now it added that name twice. Not a good thing, but it just shows you that it does work. Right? Right. All right, next exercise. And the last one? Oh no, there's more. All right, now we're going to do a right outer join for number 13. So you get that concept under your belt as well. It says join the contacts update table to the vendors table. Output the following fields. Looks very similar to what we've done. Make sure to use column aliases as shown below. This should include any contact person who are not assigned to any vendors. So this is actually just going to be a little bit of a modification of what we've already done, right? In fact, just to kind of save a little bit of time here, I'm going to copy and paste this in. And of course it copy and pastes in like that. So I shall clean it up a little bit. And you can do this any way you want. A lot of us who work with databases regularly tend to use certain formatting to kind of make it more, comfortable as to what we're used to looking at. And this is kind of the format we've been following here in class. Notice the change here, the right join. And this is going to give you a little bit different output All right, didn't like something that I did. I'm not sure what that is. Let's just run it again. There it is. And you should have, slightly different output here, including a couple of nulls here, where we do have a contact person, but not necessarily attached to a vendor. Now, we know where these two came from, right? Those are the ones I just added, but they weren't attached to a vendor, so no wonder they're null on the left. But you see how the right join is working different than the left join? And if you think about the right and the left, whatever you're listing first here is going to be your left, whatever you're listing right here will be your right. And so it kind of takes it from that, but what's on the right to what's on the left. And I'll tell you what, in some cases, if it helps you to have that on the same line, when you do a left join and a right join, and it's on the same line, it's visually more appropriate, if that makes sense. So maybe you'll opt to write it like this as opposed to like this. Up to you what you prefer. I think visually that this might help you more though. All right, moving on to the last couple so we can wrap this up. Number 14. And it says, create a Cartesian product between the rows in the vendors and invoices table. How many rows did you end up with and why? And do you guys remember how to do that? There's a special command for it. Remember what the command was? Let me help you. It's called a cross join, right? And that does a special type of thing where it basically figures out kind of like all the rows put together. And here, let me just grab the statement. It's actually a very, very simple statement. It's not very difficult, so that this is not trying to be hard. This is just trying to be informative. So all you have to do is this. You can just say select from vendors, cross-join with invoices, and then when you execute that, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff here, and it gets really, really long, really, really fast. And the question is, how many rows did you end up with and why? Right? Well, the number of rows is 13,908. The reason why is basically because you have 112 in one and 114 in the other, and so if you multiply those two together, you end up with that number. So, I'm just going to throw this up on the screen here, and this is not code you type in. This is just y. And maybe the smart way to do it is like so. That's the y. One table's got 112, the other's got 114. You just multiply them. It does all the math on it and comes up with 13,908, and that's the y. All right. The next task is a pretty simple one. It says insert the following data into the invoice archive table. Just copy, paste, and execute. Okay, so let's do that. That seems pretty simple. So we'll just go back to SQL Server here, and I'm just going to paste it right in. Okay, so not worried about formatting or anything like that, but I'm just going to go ahead and execute, and hopefully it runs. Yay! Added data. Next thing they want us to do is create a full join between the contact updates and the invoice archive table. So let's take a look at how to do that. I'm just going to brute force paste that in. It's actually a pretty simple little command. It's not like very complicated. I can just get my mouse to select the text I'm trying to copy. All right, we'll just drop it right into SQL Server. And the way that, it didn't copy and paste very cleanly, but here's a full view of it with the semicolon if you so choose. So we're going to select everything from contact to updates, and then full join with the invoice archive. And then I want you to notice on these how we were playing a little bit with the acronyms in front, or what the aliases are. And then if you go ahead and run that, you should get some output that hypothetically looks like this. So the full join is grabbing what? Everything from both tables, right? You guys seeing that? And that will conclude those assignments. I know that's a lot to work on and a lot to wrap your head around. Conceptually, the parts you might struggle with the most might be not the joins, but the left join and right join. You know, like how those are functioning. So if you maybe review any information, that might be a good one to kind of wrap your head around a little bit. But I think seeing it in action helps a lot, especially if you can run a query beforehand to see what all the information is in each table, and then see how they join, and then you understand the left and the right join a little bit better. Full join drops it all. All right, this video will end here, folks.